The millionaire boss's twins were deaf, until the company's new black cleaning lady did something that changed everything. The silence on the 40th floor of the Manning Corporation was deafening that Thursday afternoon when Patricia Williams entered the executive office carrying his cleaning supplies and came across a scene that made her stop immediately. Two identical 6-year-old girls with curly blonde hair and crystal blue eyes were sitting in the corner of the room playing with dolls in complete silence. They made no noise, did not talk, only occasionally moving their lips to each other, as if whispering invisible secrets. "Don't worry about her," said Richard Manning, the company's billionaire CEO, without looking up from his documents. "Emma and Sophie have been deaf since birth. Completely deaf. Just ignore her and do his job." Patricia was 32 years old and never imagined that her first day as a cleaner at that technology company would bring her face to face with something she knew intimately. His younger brother had been born with partial hearing loss, and she had spent her entire adolescence learning sign language and special techniques to communicate with him. What intrigued her most was not the fact that the girls were deaf, but rather small details that his experience had taught her to observe. When she vacuumed near them, they both turned their heads slightly toward the sound. When Richard tapped his pen on the table across the room, Sophie frowned slightly, as if something had bothered her. "How long have they been like this?" Patricia asked casually, organizing the cleaning supplies. "Since she was born," Richard replied, fatigue evident in his voice. "I've spent a fortune on the best specialists in the country. Dr. Harrison, Dr. Mitchell, the entire team at the Manhattan Hearing Institute. They all confirmed it. Profound bilateral sensory neural deafness. She will never hear a word." Patricia watched discreetly as she cleaned. The girls played in a strangely coordinated way, as if following a rhythm that only they could perceive. When Richard received a call and spoke louder, they both became visibly tense, even with their backs to him. "Where's her mother?" she asked, trying to keep the conversation casual. Richard's face immediately darkened. "She died in a car accident when they were 2. It's just me and them now. And a team of specialized caregivers, of course." It was then that Patricia decided to do a simple test. She deliberately dropped a coin behind the girls, far enough away that it wouldn't create a vibration in the floor, but close enough to make a clear sound. Immediately, Emma turned her head in the exact direction of the sound. "Interesting," Patricia murmured to herself. "What's interesting, Richard asked, finally paying attention. "Nothing, sir. Just admiring how beautiful she is." Over the next 2 hours, Patricia made discreet observations that left her increasingly intrigued. The girls responded subtly to specific sounds, showed discomfort with loud noises, and even seemed to communicate through a system of signs that she had never seen in any manual of sign language. As she was finishing cleaning, Patricia approached the girls and waved gently. They both looked at her with obvious curiosity. Slowly, she made the basic sign for hello in American Sign Language. The reaction was instant and surprising. Emma and Sophie glanced at each other quickly, then looked back at Patricia with an expression that mixed surprise and hope. Sophie made a hesitant movement with her hands, clearly trying to respond, but stopped mid-gesture and looked nervously in her father's direction. At that moment, Patricia realized that something was deeply wrong with this situation. Children who had been completely deaf since birth would not react that way to sound stimuli, and more importantly, they would not show hesitation in communicating through signs. As she put away his cleaning supplies, a certainty grew inside her. Those girls were not completely deaf, and for some sinister reason, someone wanted them to continue believing that they were. But what Patricia didn't realize was that her discovery would pit her against a much darker scheme involving respected professionals who profited from keeping 2 children trapped in a world of unnecessary silence. If you are enjoying this story of discovery and courage, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what this cleaning lady was about to discover would not only change the lives of those girls, but expose a web of lies that no one could have imagined. The next morning, Patricia arrived at the Manning Corporation an hour early, determined to observe the girls in their natural environment before Richard arrived at the office. What she discovered made her even more convinced that something was terribly wrong. Emma and Sophie were playing in the corner of the room with a specialized caregiver named Helen, a strict 50-year-old woman who spoke to the girls using exaggerated, slow gestures, as if they were mentally disabled as well as deaf. "Don't make a mess," Helen gestured dramatically, moving her lips exaggeratedly slowly. "Daddy doesn't like it when you make noise." Patricia watched discreetly as she organized the cleaning supplies. The girls seemed frustrated, trying to communicate something to Helen through signs that the caregiver clearly did not understand or purposely ignored. That's when Patricia noticed something disturbing. When Helen left the room to take a phone call, Emma whispered something in Sophie's ear. It wasn't exaggerated gestures or lip movements. It was a real whisper, almost inaudible, but definitely a vocalized sound. "My God," Patricia muttered to herself, pretending to clean the nearby window. When Richard arrived at the office, his first action was to check that the girls were well-behaved and quiet. He didn't even look directly at her, just nodded to Helen that everything was under control. "Patricia," he said without looking up from his documents, "I need you to be especially careful with the cleaning today. I have an important meeting with investors and can't have any unnecessary distractions." The word distractions was said with a brief glance in the direction of his daughters, and Patricia felt her stomach churn. This man treated his own daughters as inconveniences to be managed, not as children who needed love and attention. During the afternoon, while Richard was in his meeting, Patricia decided to risk a more direct approach. She approached the girls and, making sure Helen had left for lunch, made a simple gesture, "Can you hear me?" The reaction was instant and devastating. Both girls looked at each other in panic, then glanced quickly at the security cameras installed in the corners of the room. Emma shook her head vigorously, putting her finger to her lips in a universal gesture of silence. At that moment, Patricia understood the horror of what she was witnessing. These children could not only hear, they were being deliberately silenced, forced to pretend to have a disability that he did not have. "Why can't you talk?" Patricia asked in a very low voice, pretending to clean the nearby table. Sophie, the braver of the two, made a discreet gesture pointing to a photograph on Richard's desk. It was a photo of his with a man in a white coat in a doctor's office, both smiling and shaking hands. In that photo, Patricia immediately recognized the face of the man who had changed her life forever. It was Dr. Marcus Harrison, the same doctor who had misdiagnosed his brother Kevin with total deafness when he was only 4 years old. Kevin had spent 5 years of his childhood believing he was completely deaf, being treated with inappropriate methods and kept isolated from normal children, until Patricia, at 16, insisted that the family seek a second medical opinion. The new specialist discovered that Kevin had only partial hearing loss that could have been easily corrected with appropriate devices from the beginning. Medical negligence had cost Kevin 5 crucial years of social and academic development. He never fully recovered from the psychological trauma of believing he was disabled, when in fact he could have led a completely normal life. "Dr. Harrison," Patricia whispered, recognizing the name on the gold plaque in the photo. Emma nodded almost imperceptibly, her tears confirming Patricia's suspicions. That afternoon, when Richard returned from the meeting, Patricia made a courageous decision that would change everything. "Mr. Manning," she said, interrupting him as he checked his emails, "I need to talk to you about your daughters." Richard looked up with obvious irritation. "Patricia, I've already made it clear that his job here is cleaning, not questioning medical decisions made by renowned experts." "Renowned experts like Dr. Harrison?" Patricia replied, her voice laden with a firmness that surprised even her. Richard's face changed immediately. His casual expression gave way to something much darker and more defensive. "How do you know Dr. Harrison's name?" "Because he did the same thing to my brother 15 years ago. Kevin spent half his childhood believing he was deaf when in fact he only had mild hearing loss that could be corrected." Richard stood up slowly, her posture becoming threatening. "Are you implying that the best specialists in the country misdiagnosed my daughters?" "I'm saying that his daughters aren't deaf, Mr. Manning. And from what I've observed today, she knows it. The question is, why do you want her to believe she is?" The silence that followed was thick with tension. Richard walked to the window, his hands clenched into fists. When he turned back, his face had taken on a look of calculated coldness that made Patricia realize she had just awakened something very dangerous. "Patricia, you are clearly confused about your role here. His theories are completely inappropriate and offensive. I suggest you focus on your work or consider looking for another job." But Patricia had seen the momentary panic in his eyes before the cold mask formed. She had touched on something he desperately wanted to keep hidden. That night, as she put away her cleaning supplies, Patricia knew she had crossed a line of no return. She was certain that Emma and Sophie were being held prisoners of a medical lie, just as his brother had been. The difference was that this time she was not a helpless teenager. She was a grown woman with experience, knowledge, and most importantly, a determination forged by the pain of seeing someone she loved suffer unnecessarily for years. As she waited for the elevator, Patricia couldn't help but think of the expression of silent despair in Emma and Sophie's eyes. She was asking for help in the only way she could, through pleading looks and discreet gestures that no one else bothered to interpret. What Patricia didn't yet know was that her decision to confront Richard had set in motion a series of events that would reveal a scheme far more sinister than she could have imagined. And that the apparent coldness with which he had reacted was only the first sign of how far this man was willing to go to protect his darkest secrets. In the 3 days following her confrontation with Richard, Patricia arrived at the office to find a completely different environment. Helen had been replaced by 2 new caregivers, who worked alternating shifts and followed much stricter protocols with Emma and Sophie. The girls now spent most of their time in a separate room, away from the area where Patricia worked, and when she tried to greet them in the hallways, they quickly looked away, clearly instructed not to interact with her. Administrative changes, Richard explained coldly when Patricia asked about the new routine. The girls need more specialized care. His only responsibility remains cleaning. But Patricia was not easily intimidated. During her lunch break, she did something that would completely change the course of the situation. She called her cousin Denise, who had been working as a nurse at the city's children's hospital for 15 years and had connections in almost every medical department in the region. "Denise, I need a very important favor," Patricia said, her voice low on the phone. "Can you get me information on a doctor named Dr. Marcus Harrison? It's for an emergency." Harrison? That name sounds familiar. Wait, are you talking about the guy who lost his medical license last year? Patricia's heart raced. Lost his license? What do you mean? Girl, it was a huge scandal. He falsified diagnoses of children with hearing impairments to charge wealthy families for expensive treatments. The investigation lasted months. Why do you want to know about him? Patricia quickly explained Emma and Sophie's situation, omitting only their names to protect the girls. Denise was silent for a long moment. "Patricia, if what you're telling me is true, these children are victims of a crime. Harrison may have lost his license, but the doctors who continued to follow his fraudulent diagnoses are still practicing. Can you help me prove it?" "More than that. I know a speech therapist who specializes in child development, Dr. Jennifer Costa. She was one of the key witnesses in the case against Harrison. If you can get these girls to her, even for a few minutes, she can confirm whether they really have deafness or are being misled." That afternoon, Patricia returned to the office with renewed determination. She knew she had to find a way to prove that Emma and Sophie could hear, but she also had to be extremely careful not to put the girls at risk. While cleaning, she noticed that Richard had left for a meeting and the 2 new caregivers were busy organizing medications in the living room. It was the perfect opportunity. Patricia quietly approached the room where the girls were playing alone. When they saw her, her expressions lit up instantly, but they quickly became cautious again. "It's okay," Patricia whispered, making sure no one was listening. "I know you can hear me perfectly well." Emma and Sophie looked at each other, tears welling up in their eyes. Finally, Sophie nodded almost imperceptibly. "I need you to help me prove it," Patricia continued. "But first I need to know, why are you pretending to be deaf?" Emma looked at the door, then approached Patricia and whispered in her ear, "Daddy said that if we talk, he'll send us away. Like he sent Mommy away." Patricia felt her blood run cold. "What do you mean, he sent Mom away?" Sophie joined the conversation, her little voice trembling. "Mom didn't die in the accident. She tried to take us away because she found out we weren't deaf. Dad said she was sick in the head, and the doctors agreed." The revelation was like a punch in the stomach for Patricia. Richard had admitted his own wife to a psychiatric institution to keep the false diagnosis scheme going. "Where is his mom now?" "In the place for sick people," Emma whispered. "Dad said that if we tell anyone who can hear, we'll go there too." At that moment, Patricia understood the truly sinister extent of what she was facing. This wasn't just medical negligence or financial greed. Richard was using his own daughters as pawns in a much darker game, and he had destroyed an entire family to keep her lives protected. "Listen carefully," she said to the girls, her voice firm but loving. "You're not going anywhere. I'm going to protect you, but I need your help. Can you be brave for a few days?" Both girls nodded, and for the first time in years, Patricia saw genuine hope in her eyes. During the rest of the afternoon, Patricia mentally devised a plan. She had 3 goals: to prove that the girls were not deaf, to find out where her mother was, and to expose Richard and his medical accomplices. When Richard returned from the meeting, he found Patricia working as usual, unaware that she had just discovered secrets that could destroy her carefully constructed life. "Everything quiet here?" he asked the caregivers casually to her. "Yes, Mr. Manning. The girls have been very quiet, as usual." Richard smiled with satisfaction, glancing briefly at Patricia, who continued cleaning the windows as if nothing had happened. What he didn't know was that Patricia had discreetly photographed some medical documents on his desk, including a letter from a psychiatric hospital with the name Elena Manning on the letterhead. That night, Patricia called Denise again and told her everything she had discovered. Her cousin was shocked. "Patricia, this is much more serious than we imagined. If her woman was forcibly admitted based on false diagnoses, we're talking about kidnapping, false imprisonment, and child abuse. You need professional help immediately." "Do I know anyone who can help us?" "I have a friend who is a social worker specializing in child abuse cases. Dr. Sandra Martinez. She works with the police on complex cases like this." "But Patricia, are you sure you want to get involved in this? This man seems extremely dangerous." Patricia thought of Emma and Sophie's tears, of their mother possibly being unjustly hospitalized for years, of his brother Kevin and all the others who had suffered at the hands of corrupt doctors like Dr. Harrison. "I'm already involved, Denise. These children need someone to fight for them." The next morning, Patricia arrived at work knowing she was about to start a war that would change everything. As she organized his cleaning supplies, she watched Richard talking on the phone, probably with one of the doctors who kept the scheme going. Under the weight of all those terrible secrets, she maintained her calm and professional demeanor, as if she were just an invisible cleaning lady doing his job. But anyone watching closely would notice that it wasn't submission that guided her movements. It was the strategic determination of someone who was about to completely rewrite that family's history and expose a network of corruption that had destroyed innocent lives for years. Friday, 10 in the morning. Richard was in his monthly meeting with the company board when Patricia put her plan into action. She was not alone. Dr. Jennifer Costa and Dr. Sandra Martinez entered the Manning Corporation building accompanied by 2 investigators from the Department of Child Services, all duly authorized by a court order that Patricia had helped obtain through the photographic evidence. "Mr. Manning," the secretary called into the conference room, her voice trembling, "there are people here who need to speak with you immediately. They say it's about your daughters." Richard interrupted the presentation on quarterly profits. "Tell them I'm busy. Anything related to the girls can be handled by the nannies." "Sir, they have official documents. And the cleaning lady Patricia is with them." Richard's blood ran cold. Patricia was supposed to be working on the floor below. How had she gotten involved with the authorities? When he went down to the office, he found a scene that made him instantly realize that her carefully constructed life was falling apart. Emma and Sophie were sitting comfortably chatting, talking loudly and clearly, with Dr. Jennifer, while Patricia documented everything with his cell phone. "Daddy always said that if we talked, he would send us to the place for sick people like Mommy," Sophie explained naturally to the speech therapist. "But Aunt Patricia said that wasn't true." "And can you hear me perfectly?" Dr. Jennifer asked, covering her mouth so the girls couldn't lip read. "Yes, doctor. We've always been able to hear everything," Emma replied without hesitation. Richard entered the room with his fists clenched. "What's going on here? Who authorized you to disturb my daughters?" Dr. Sandra Martinez stepped forward, showing her official documentation. "Mr. Manning, I am a social worker specializing in child abuse cases. We have a warrant to investigate allegations of medical negligence and possible psychological coercion." "That's absurd. My daughters are deaf. I have medical reports from dozens of specialists confirming, including reports from Dr. Marcus Harrison, who lost his medical license last year for falsifying diagnoses." Patricia interrupted, her voice firm and controlled. "The same reports I photographed from his office showing glaring inconsistencies between the initial exams and the final diagnoses?" Richard's face paled. You photographed private documents?" "Documents that prove your daughters were deliberately held in psychological captivity," Dr. Sandra continued. "And we also found interesting hospital records about Elena Manning, his wife." At that moment, as if the situation wasn't devastating enough for Richard, the door opened again. Elena Manning entered the room, accompanied by a lawyer and a nurse. After 4 years of forced confinement in a psychiatric clinic, she was legally free thanks to the evidence Patricia had provided to the authorities. "Mommy!" Emma and Sophie shouted simultaneously, running to hug her. "You're back. You're really back." Elena knelt down to hug her daughters, tears streaming down her face. "Mommy never gave up on you, my princesses. And now this whole lie is over." Richard stood frozen, watching her family reunite as his world crumbled around him. "Elena, you're sick. The doctors confirmed that you had psychotic episodes. The same doctors you paid to keep my daughters trapped in a lie." Elena stood up, facing him for the first time in years. "Richard, I discovered the truth about Dr. Harrison's scheme when Emma and Sophie were 2 years old. I found out you were receiving money from the clinic to maintain false diagnoses. When I tried to expose everything, you used his contacts to have me forcibly committed." Patricia approached, showing her cell phone. "This entire conversation is being recorded and broadcast live to the appropriate authorities, including his confession that he knew about Dr. Harrison's scheme." Richard realized he was completely cornered. "You don't understand. I needed the insurance money. The company was struggling and you used her own daughters as a source of income, keeping them prisoners of a disability they didn't have," Dr. Sandra interrupted, taking notes. "Mr. Manning, you are being formally charged with insurance fraud, child abuse, forced psychiatric hospitalization, and criminal association." As the investigators began to officially document the situation, Patricia watched Emma and Sophie playing freely with his mother, talking and laughing loudly for the first time in years. The transformation was extraordinary, from silent, frightened children to vibrant, communicative little girls in a matter of minutes. Richard tried one last desperate gambit. "Patricia, you're just a cleaning lady. No one is going to take his word against her word." Patricia smiled for the first time since she had started working there. "It's not her word, Mr. Manning. It's the recordings of his daughters confirming everything, it's the contradictory medical reports he kept in his office, it's the bank records showing payments from Dr. Harrison's clinic, and it's Elena's testimony about how he had her committed to keep the scheme going. Any competent professional would have identified this within 5 minutes of a proper evaluation. She has been a victim of one of the most cruel forms of psychological abuse I have ever documented." "Daddy," Sophie approached him for the first time without fear, "why did you make us believe you couldn't hear? Why did you send Mommy away?" Richard couldn't answer. For the first time in years, he found himself completely speechless, facing the devastating consequences of her selfish choices. As he was escorted out of his own building, he heard Elena chatting excitedly with her daughters about all the plans they had to make up for lost time. Emma and Sophie's crystal-clear voices echoed through the hallways, sounds he had deliberately silenced for years. Patricia gathered her cleaning supplies for the last time, but now she was no longer an invisible cleaning lady. She was a brave woman who had restored a family and exposed a criminal network that had destroyed innocent lives for pure profit. But what no one could have predicted was how this victory for justice would spread far beyond that courtroom, creating ripples that would not only transform the lives of Elena, Emma, and Sophie, but inspire systemic changes that would protect thousands of other vulnerable families across the country. 6 months later, Patricia Williams was sitting in the country's most famous television studio, being interviewed about the case that had transformed child protection laws nationwide. His book, The Silence That Screams, had become a bestseller, and she now ran a foundation dedicated to investigating suspected cases of fraudulent medical diagnoses. Richard Manning was serving a 12-year sentence for multiple federal crimes. Her company had gone bankrupt after the scandal, and he lost permanent custody of his daughters. The latest reports described him as a broken man who spent his days in prison obsessively repeating, "I just wanted to protect my money." Emma and Sophie, now 7 years old, attended a regular school where they were recognized as bright and communicative students. Elena had fully recovered from her years of forced hospitalization and worked as a lawyer specializing in child abuse cases, using her experience to help other families. Dr. Harrison and 5 colleagues faced criminal charges in 17 states. The investigation revealed more than 200 families affected by the scheme, resulting in millions of dollars in compensation and complete reforms in pediatric medical protocols. During the interview, when asked how a simple cleaning lady had managed to bring down such a complex scheme, Patricia smiled, "It wasn't me who brought anything down. It was Emma and Sophie who showed me that sometimes the greatest courage lies in breaking the silence that others impose on us." The story of Patricia proved that true revenge is not destroying those who harm us, but building something greater than he could ever imagine. Richard tried to use 2 innocent children as a source of profit, but ended up laying the groundwork for a revolution that protected thousands of other vulnerable families. If this story of courage touched his heart, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment. Have you ever witnessed an injustice that no one wanted to see? Her voice could be the next one to break a dangerous silence.